Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Romeo and Juliet. In this video, we're going to be having a little look at Act 1, Scene 4, getting a good introduction to the fascinating character that is Mercutio and having an in-depth look at that famous speech of Queen Mab. So let's get started.
Okay, so let's start off with a quick plot summary. So the scene begins with Romeo, Mercutio and Benvolio on their way with some of the rest of their friends on their way to the Capulet Ball for a big old party. And Romeo is feeling incredibly blue about the whole thing. And he's saying he doesn't want to dance, and he doesn't want to go, and he feels like lead, and love has just completely and utterly ruined him. And it's kind of quite similar, I suppose, in tone to what we've seen in the previous scenes with his kind of love sickness. So he's on a bit of a moo about the whole thing. And so Mercutio, his other best friend, is trying to cheer him up, and so he's having a little bit of a giggle, he's having a little bit of a naughty kind of chat about his view on love, quite different to Romeo's. And then as the scene progresses, Mercutio sort of holds the floor for the majority of the scene because he has this really big speech, very, very famous speech about Queen Mab that starts, "Oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you," which is because Romeo starts talking about his dreams. And we'll look at this speech in quite a lot of detail, but it's all about the kind of idea about desire and fantasy and the kind of corruption and falsity of desire and fantasy, and all about this this creature, this sort of, she's the midwife of the fairies, Queen Mab, and how she kind of infects people's sleep. And it's quite a chaotic and quite a sort of passionate and quite almost sort of mad speech that results in actually Romeo and Benvolio just being like, "Oh, cool it, Mercutio, calm down, enough," because he's sort of got himself like quite het up. And then the scene ends with this quite foreboding, quite ominous moment where Romeo is sort of reflecting upon this feeling of dread, this feeling of doom, that there is some consequence hanging in the stars. So it's this wonderful kind of introduction again, or reintroduction, I should say, of the theme of fate. This scene, therefore, really is about Mercutio, about introducing us to this incredible character who is strong and passionate and loyal and funny and intelligent, but also quite tempestuous and full of conflict himself. A very dear friend of mine and teaching colleague told me a little while ago that apparently Shakespeare saw a lot of himself in Mercutio, and I love this idea that actually when he writes the scene, you're getting a bit of a sense of William Shakespeare's brain as well. So let's get started just by thinking about how he and Romeo are quite different in their outlooks. So this is taken from a conversation about Romeo's feelings about love and how painful love is, because as I said in the summary, he's on a bit of a downward spiral, talking about how unhappy he is because of the way that love makes him feel, that love is like this burden. And he questions, "Is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and it pricks like thorn." Mercutio replies, "If love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down." So we've got these really, really contrasting ideas about love. One is full of kind of angst and sort of romance, and the other is all full of kind of bawdy imagery. So we start off with a rhetorical question. I'm just going to give you a few little bits of critical terminology to help you analyse here. So Romeo trying to kind of understand love. Is love a tender thing? Because at the moment all he's feeling is pain. It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous. So we've got this repetition of this intensifying adverb too, suggesting that the way that love makes him feel is overwhelming that it creates heightened emotions. Look at these adjectives: rough, rude, and boisterous. So real juxtaposition with what you would assume love makes you feel. It's aggressive, it's unpleasant, it creates discomfort, backed up then in this simile, and it pricks like thorn. And this is really interesting, because obviously you're thinking about like the concept of a rose, which is associated with love, but having thorns that can cause pain, that can raise blood. So Romeo is sort of battling with the contradictions of love, that unrequited love is so brutal and painful. Mercutio: if love be rough with you, will you be rough with love? So we've got this personification of love now, saying love doesn't treat you well, well, you don't treat love well, and flipping on its head. He's using imperatives here: prick love for pricking, beat that, be rough with love. So you've got this kind of idea of his status with Romeo. He's sort of, it's tongue-in-cheek telling him what to do, but there's a confidence in him here, and the way he perceives love. We've got this repetition of Romeo's words, so it's this playful back and forth. Shakespeare loves a bit of wordplay and punning, and so the pun here and the repetition is creating this sexual innuendo, because Romeo is saying that love pricks him like a thorn, so it hurts him, and so prick love for pricking, he's playing on the kind of idea of prick meaning male genitalia. So he's talking about sex here, about sort of enjoying love for what you can get out of it. You're not going to be beaten down by love if you think about just having sex and having fun. So much kind of bawdier, much ruder view on love coming from Mercutio here. And perhaps it is Romeo's moaning, his moaning, his whining about his desires and his needs that triggers this speech, this Queen Mab speech, because it is shortly after Romeo talks about a dream that he has had. He says, I dreamt a dream tonight. Mercutio: so did I. Well, what was yours? That dreamers often lie. Romeo says, in bed asleep, while they do dream things true. And this is what sort of brings on this long speech about Queen Mab. I'll read it to you in stages, and we'll start having a little look at some of the devices. Feel free to pause me now and just reread it in your mind straight off, so you've got the whole of it here. But I do think that part of the reason for kind of Mercutio's growing further is perhaps some frustration with Romeo and Romeo's kind of sense of desire and fantasy. So he says, oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you. She is the fairies' midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an older man, drawn with a team of little atomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep. So immediately we've got this imagery relating to size. So Queen Mab, this little fairy queen, the fairies' midwife, she's teeny tiny, yeah, and she with her little teeny tiny team are small enough that they can sort of go into men's noses whilst they're asleep. So we've got this idea of something very small, something very innocuous, having this quite big impact. Her wagon spokes made of long spiders' legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, the traces of the smallest spider's web, the collars of the moonshine's watery beams, her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film, her wagoner, a small grey-coated gnat, not so big as a round little worm, pricked from the lazy finger of a maid. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut, made by the joiner squirrel or old grub. Time out of mind, the fairies' coachmakers. Okay, so in this section, we get this very sort of precise description of the chariot that she rides, like the wagon, and we're told again we've got this emphasis being placed on size. So the wagon spokes of the wheels are long spiders' legs, the cover of the wings the cover, the wings of grasshoppers. So we've got this juxtaposition between the associated sort of size and strength and tangibility of a wagon that you would expect to be large and solid, but it's juxtaposed with this insect imagery that suggests fragility and smallness. And we've got this lovely build-up of anaphoric listing as Shakespeare and Mercutio list all of the intricacies of Queen Mab's chariot. He describes how it's the size of an empty hazelnut, or it is an empty hazelnut. So imagine a little nutshell, so just this big, with Queen Mab inside, and that this has been made for her by the squirrel. So, I mean, it's quite lovely, actually, and it kind of brings you to mind, you know, ideas about fairy tales and fantasy. It's all quite sweet at this moment and innocent. Makes me think, you know, of like Thumbelina. It's really quite charming, this sense of fantasy being created. Obviously, it doesn't stay that way. So now we get a little bit of further development. And in this state, she gallops night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. Over courtiers' knees that dream on curtsies straight, over lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees, over ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream, which oft the angry Mab with blisters plagues, because their breaths with sweetmeats tainted are. Sometimes she gallops over a courtier's nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit. And sometimes comes she with a tithe pig's tail, tickling a parson's nose as lies asleep. Then dreams he of another benefice. Okay, so it's getting a little bit more complicated here. So in this early section, we have again this anaphoric listing over courtiers' knees, over lawyers' fingers, over ladies' lips. So notice how we're moving back into the material world. These are the people sleeping that she is going and having this kind of effect on, or she's kind of producing their dreams. And if you look at all of the things that they dream, so note the repetition, dream, 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 all of this is to do with the concept of desire. So the courtiers are desiring status in their dreams. So the idea of being curtsied down to, bowed down to. The lawyers, they are dreaming of fees. So they're dreaming of money. And the ladies, they are dreaming of kisses. So they're dreaming of love. Notice the way that you've got these patterns. So knees, because it's about the idea of curtsying or bowing. Fingers, because it's the idea of taking, it's about money. And lips, because it's the idea of love and kissing. So this at the moment is about specific people and their specific desires. But then look how dark it becomes as the sense of corruption escalates. Angry Mab with blisters plagues these lips. So there's this sense of punishment being created here in this quite horrible metaphor that connotes disease. And then we've got this idea of escalating corruption, this building corruption about people dreaming of benefit, of money, of greed. And then in the next section, this sense of greed and corruption continues. Sometimes she driveth over a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breeches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of healths 5 fathom deep. And then anon drums in his ear, at which he starts and wakes, and being thus frightened, swears a pray or two, and sleeps again. This is that very Mab that plats the manes of horses in the night and bakes the elf-locks and foul sluttish hairs, which once untangled much misfortune bodes. This is the hag, when maids lie on their backs, that presses them and leans them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. This is she. And that's, of course, when Romeo and Benvolio interrupt him. Sorry, her, Queen Mab is her. All right, so let's go back to this sense of building corruption. Note the way that we've got this violent imagery built in, dreaming about cutting foreign throats and of these sort of weapons. Now, in this moment, this dream, because it's a soldier, this is a dream about being successful, isn't it? You know, that going off and fighting for your country. But note here that when he awakes with drums in his ear, he's too frightened and so goes back to sleep. So this is telling us about actually fantasy and reality, that actually the fantasy of the desire is better than the reality. So certainly Mercutio might be saying something about Romeo and his kind of sense of fantasy and desire here. And then we get this sense of building anger, particularly as we get this repetition, you know, that this is she, this is that very Mab, this is the hag, this is she. So the repetition of this is, like he's looking at this concept of Queen Mab, and it's making him more and more frustrated. And it's this one that I think is so interesting. This is the hag. When maids lie on their backs, that presses them and leans them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. So in this situation, these maids lying on their backs, obviously we've got sexual innuendo here. We're talking about women having sexual discoveries and making sexual discoveries, presses them, you know, so the idea of them having sex for the first time, but then learns them first to bear. So this is now about pregnancy. So it's saying, so she encourages women to lose their virginity, but only so that they can reproduce, that they can make babies, making them women of good carriage. And this has got to be a comment on society, especially when you think about how Mercutio has been so open about the concept of sexuality and enjoying love for sex. But when it's for women, the focus has got to be on birth, on having babies. And, you know, if you think about Juliet in the previous scene, and the kind of like, right, okay, let's get cracking, you know, you're almost 14, it's time for you to get married, not so she can love, but so she can reproduce. So there's definitely this kind of focus here on women in society and what role they play. And Mercutio seems to have become like more and more kind of incensed as he's talking about this corruption of desire, that, like I said, Romeo and Benvolio interrupt him and sort of say, peace, peace, enough. Why is it here? Why is this speech here? And there's so many kind of varying interpretations of it. I see it as this kind of conflict between fantasy and reality, or desire and reality. And I think that it stems from his perhaps growing frustration with Romeo, and then it sort of escalates. But it's a sign of Mercutio's wit and intelligence, and his outspoken ways. The scene ends in a very different way. You know, they're heading off for this party, and Romeo stops and reflects. You know, Benvolio is like, oh, you know, we better hurry, otherwise we're going to be too late. And Romeo goes, I fear too early. So there's this sense of regret already about whether or not they should be going to this party. And then he explains, for my mind misgives some consequence, yet hanging in the stars shall bitterly begin his fearful date with this night's revels, and expire the term of a despised life closed in my breast by some vile forfeit of untimely death. If we just start there, I mean, this metaphor is so ominous. A consequence hanging in the stars, like waiting, looming over. And note how vague it is, this vague language, some consequence. We've got this indefinite determiner here, some consequence. So we don't know what it is, but it's certainly something foreboding. And now we've got this personification that the consequence is beginning his fearful date. So there's this idea of fate propelling forward, that there's this motion, and it's starting with this night's revels. So he's basically saying, I've got this feeling that this party is setting something in action, and what that's setting in action is something that is going to bring about my untimely death, by some vile forfeit of untimely death. Check out that adverb, untimely. This is such foreshadowing of the end of the play, where the deaths are, of course, untimely. So right from word go, we are getting these hints of the death that will come. But then he kind of changes tack. But he that hath the steerage of my course direct my sail. On lusty gentlemen. Won't worry about the lusty bit. So it's almost like in this moment he's gone, no, kind of pull yourself together. We've got this metaphor of a journey, the steerage of my course, like he's on a boat, which kind of fits into this idea about beginning the course, beginning the date, moving forward. But here he's saying he, so fate, or contextually God, because the contemporary audience of the time did believe that fate was the will of God. So, you know, you are heading in one direction, but actually it's God's will. That's kind of what fate was to them. So when he says he, it's both personified fate and it is God. He that hath the steerage of my course direct my sail. So an extension of that metaphor there. He's like, all right, whatever will be, will be. You blow me in the direction that I meant to be going, and I will go that way. And then it's like, right, to the party we go. Okay, so just final thoughts here. The themes that have been introduced to us, more on the idea of love. Again, we've got Romeo with his unrequited love, the burden of love, and it's all very, very angsty. But it's all muddled up with the idea of desire and fantasy. So desire doesn't have to be about love, as we heard from the Queen Mab speech. It can be for money. It can be for status, as well as it can be for children, or more traditional kind of love. But the kind of illusion, because, you know, even Romeo says, you know, you're speaking of nonsense. There is something nonsensical about the Queen Mab speech. We've also got the idea of corruption running through that speech again, that what can seem a pure kind of wish or desire or fantasy can become something more negative when you're granted it. So it's about that fulfillment of your desires, of your fantasies, and then how that ends in corruption. And of course, right at the end, fate. This idea that this night is setting a course of action, ready to go. And it's exactly what is happening, because everything kind of stems from this moment. So thank you so much for watching. That's it from me. I hope that was helpful. If you haven't subscribed, oh, do please just click that button, and then when Act 1 Scene 5 is ready, you'll know all about it. Give me a shout if you've got any questions or any requests, just pop them in the comments and I will get back to you. That's it from me. So all is to say is thank you and happy revising.